Right, so we come back to chapter 7. We are in the middle of chapter 7 of Read Straight is the Gate. We see that when Jerome came to Fungus Marg for meeting Elisa, living with her for a few days, he was totally disappointed, and Elisa had changed so much that all the qualities in her which Jerome loved, those were no longer there. She stopped reading good poetry, good literature. She dressed in an ugly way and did her hairstyle to make her appear less attractive. And she kept herself busy in doing trivial household works, giving Jerome very little time. So we see that the drifting away between them, which was presented in the last chapter, happening through correspondence. As their correspondence became more and more less frequent, and that they hoped would change when they would physically meet, but when they actually met, then it was more or less confirmed that they are drifting away from each other. Thus the days from which I had promised myself so much felicity passed by. So he had promised himself, or he had believed that he would be very happy in the days when he would live with Elisa for a few days, but the days passed by without any such happiness. I contemplated their flight with stupor, but without desiring to increase their number or delay their passage. So greatly each one aggravated my grief. Which means that he did not want to be there any longer. He did not find any pleasure, and every day brought him more and more unhappiness. 2 days before my departure, however, Elisa came with me to the bench beside the deserted marl pit. It was a bright autumn evening. As far as the cloudless horizon, every blue-tinted detail of the landscape stood out distinct and clear, and in the past, the dimmest of its memories. We see that description of nature here in this novel is very sketchy. There is some description of the garden, there is some description of the sky, of the trees, but it is very sketchy. The novel does not focus on the exterior. It focuses much more on the interior or the inward feelings of the protagonist. But what is it I can do, my friend? So Jerome was lamenting. I could not withhold my lamentations as I showed her my present unhappiness, as I showed her the happiness I had lost. But what is it I can do, my friend? She said at once. You are in love with a phantom. No, not with a phantom, Elisa, with a creature of your imagination. Alas, I am not inventing. She was once my friend. I call upon her, Elisa. Elisa, it was you I loved. What have you done with yourself? What have you made yourself become? So, Elisa wanted him to believe that she was really different than what Jerome imagined herself her to be. So, Jerome's Elisa was a creature of his imagination, but the real Elisa was how Elisa presented herself to Jerome at that moment, which Jerome did not accept because he knew that Elisa was not like that. Even though he could not see through Elisa's pretenses, even though he could not realize that Elisa was merely play acting, she was appearing to be different, but she was actually the same. Jerome could not see through it, but still he could not believe that it was the real Elisa. He thought that Elisa had changed. She remained a few moments without answering, slowly pulling a flower to pieces and keeping her head down. Then at last, Jerome, why don't you simply admit that you love me less? Because it is not true, because it is not true, I exclaimed indignantly. Because I never loved you more. Jerome would not accept this suggestion because Elisa deliberately threw this suggestion that Jerome did not love her as before. He loved her less. Elisa wants to establish that their love has dwindled, that their love has perished. So we see that some kind of a game is going on, and Jerome becomes the victim because he behaves in a very naive manner. He cannot see through Elisa's game, or he cannot see through Elisa's pretensions. You love me and yet you regret me, she said, trying to smile and slightly shrugging her shoulders. I cannot put my love into the past. That is, I never regret loving you. I still love you. The ground was giving way beneath me and I caught at anything. It must pass with the rest. Yet this love will not endure, it will also pass. A love like mine will pass only with me. That is, when I die, only then this love will end. It will gradually grow less. The Elisa whom you think you still love already exists only in your memory. A day will come when you will only remember that you loved her. Elisa is deliberately trying to convince Jerome that with time everything gets diminished and everything gradually disappears. In other words, worldly love is not permanent, it cannot lead to permanent happiness, it tends to disappear and die. That is what Elisa wants Jerome to believe. You speak as if her place might be taken in my heart, or if my heart was going to stop loving. Do you no longer remember that you once loved me yourself, that you take such pleasure in torturing me? That is, didn't you love me at some point of time? So now Jerome was convinced that Elisa didn't love him anymore, because by all her actions and speeches she was trying to kill this love. But since it was not true, the truth was that Elisa loved him all the same, but she was trying to kill this love because she wanted Jerome to be a saint and did not want earthly love to be an obstacle. So Elisa was on the verge of tears. I saw her pale lips tremble. In an almost inaudible voice she whispered, No, Elisa has not changed in that. That is, Elisa did not stop loving him. So we see that Elisa put herself in this trouble, in this situation of unhappiness. Why should she make herself as well as Jerome miserable by depriving them of their the natural fulfillment of their love, because both of them loved each other. Reed has presented this unique case where even though there is genuine love on both sides, yet this love does not lead to maturity, to engagement or marriage, because of some ideological obstacle. Why then nothing has changed, I said, seizing her arm. So Jerome seized her arm because he wanted to seize upon this idea also, that this love was still alive. So he was almost drowning. He did not find any ground below his feet. But when Elisa admitted that he still loved him, then he tried to survive by seizing this idea, desperately clinging to this idea. She went on firmly. One word would explain everything. Why don't you dare say it? What word? I have grown older. So she, from the very beginning, tried to convince Jerome that Jerome loved her less than before, and now she tries to convince him that he loved her less because she had grown older. So this age had never become an issue between them. Alyssa was slightly older than him, but you remember that earlier she always tried to tell Jerome that somebody younger would be more appropriate for him when she wanted him to love her sister Juliet. And now she brings this excuse of age to suggest that because she had grown older, so Jerome cannot love her. I protested immediately that I myself had grown as much older as she, that the difference of age between us remained the same. But she had regained control of herself. The one and only moment had gone by, and by beginning to argue, I let slip my advantage. The ground gave way beneath me. So the moment of admission of love, that was the only moment. But then whenever there is any argument, then Jerome cannot succeed. Why he cannot succeed? Because Alyssa's decision to appear to stall this true love was not based upon rationality. It was based upon faith. Her faith that earthly love is a hindrance to spiritual love or love of God. So there is actually no contradiction between love among people or marriage and spirituality. And after the Reformation, most leaders of the Reformation, as well as later some Roman Catholic writers, also have more or less accepted that the way of our lives, fulfillment of love and marriage, these things are sanctioned by religion, and they are not in contradiction with love of God. The idea which was originally there in Roman Catholicism, which compelled monks and nuns to vow for celibacy, that idea was rejected after the Reformation. But here we see that these two lovers, they are in a time warp. They tend to believe in a faith that still sees a contradiction between earthly love and love of God. And this is a matter of faith. Therefore, Jerome can never succeed by arguing with Alyssa on this matter. So Jerome leaves Fronsismar in a most bitter mood and almost believing that their love has come to an end, maybe because they have grown older. He could not change Alyssa's attitude. He totally failed. On the other hand, Alyssa made a huge influence or huge impact upon him, that changed Alyssa. And as a result, it is not that Jerome stopped loving her, but he came to believe that their love affair will never realize or materialize. This contradiction between worldly love and love of God, he came to believe that that would always be there. As soon as she was left to herself, Alyssa had relapsed to her own level, a mediocre level on which I found myself too, but on which I no longer desired her. How absurd and fantastic seemed this exhausting effort of virtue in order to reach her there, on the heights where she had been placed by my own sole endeavor. So now he is blaming himself. So Jerome thinks that he put Elisa on this high, altitude of virtue. A little less pride and our love would have been easy. But what sense was there in persisting in a love without object? This was to be obstinate, not to be faithful. Faithful to what? To a delusion. Was it not wiser to admit to myself that I had been mistaken? So you see that Jerome is totally influenced by Elisa here, and he begins to think that first he blames himself for putting Elisa on the pedestal of virtue. Then he thinks that it is futile to persist in this love because it is a love without any object. This worldly love, if it cannot be fulfilled, then it does not have any object. So how can it continue? And to what can he remain faithful? Faithful to the idea of love or to the idea of holiness? So this love appears to him as a delusion, the love for Elisa. Even though he knew that it was genuine, he thought that it was a delusion because it was not going ever to materialize. So to stick to it, to remain faithful to it, is to be obstinate. And then he got an opportunity in the school of Athens. He took it up. I agreed to take it up at once with no feeling of either ambition or pleasure, but welcoming the idea of departure as though it had been an escape. Which means that there was no happiness for Jerome here at Pangusmar or in any kind of imagined life with Elisa. Therefore, he wanted to escape the whole situation and he took up a job abroad. Therefore, the whole of chapter 7 basically depicts how Jerome and Elisa, they are drifting away. And the quotation from 12th Night forms the keynote of this idea of drift, the idea of oversaturation, and the idea of having less and less pleasure, from the same thing. And at the end of the chapter, this love appears to be more of a delusion to Jerome than a reality, because he does not find any support from Elisa. Now in chapter 8, one more meeting with Elisa is described. And this meeting is actually very pathetic because we know that Elisa, thus depriving herself of all her real pleasure, real happiness, she was gradually killing herself, and she would have an immature death. And so this would be the last meeting between the lovers before Elisa dies. And here again, this symbolic amethyst cross, it comes up, because the issue comes up, and Elisa wants to return it to Jerome because the need for it is no longer there. It stood for Elisa's love for Jerome. So as long as Elisa loved Jerome, she would have it on her. But now when Elisa was convinced that this love was not going to materialize, therefore she wanted to return it to Jerome. But Jerome refuses it. It only comes back much later, after her death, it comes back to Jerome. So the amethyst cross remains a symbol of this tortuous journey of love between Elisa and Jerome. So 3 years later, Jerome meets Elisa again towards the end of summer. And before that, he heard from Elisa the news of her father's death. A fairly long letter which I had once written her from Palestine, where I was traveling at the time, had remained unanswered, which means that Elisa was not answering to Jerome's letters anymore. Happening to be at Le Havre on I forget what errand, a natural instinct set me on the road to Fonguzmar. I knew Elisa was there, but I was afraid she might not be alone. I had not announced my arrival. So, without announcing his arrival, Jerome just goes to Fonguzmar, hoping to meet Elisa. Then, as I was passing by the little door that led into the kitchen garden, the idea of going in suddenly seized me. The door was shut. The inside bolt, however, offered only a slight resistance, and I was on the point of forcing it open with my shoulder. At that moment, I heard the sound of steps. I drew back round the corner of the wall. I could not see who it was that came out of the garden, but I felt it was Elisa. She took 3 steps forward and called in a weak voice, "Is that you, Jerome?" So, strangely it would appear that Elisa was expecting him. In fact, she tells him that she had been expecting to meet him any day. And the fact that she is very weak, that is also very clear. Like when people approach their death, before their death they assume that they would meet the people they love and so on. So there is a melancholy note about this meeting. As hearing her call me in this way, the emotion which seized on me was so great that it forced me to my knees. As I still did not answer, Elisa took a few steps forward, turned the corner of the wall, and I suddenly felt her against me, who was kneeling there hiding my face with my arm, as if in dread of seeing her too soon. She remained a few moments stooping over me while I covered her frail hands with kisses. "Why were you hiding?" she said, as simply as if those 3 years of absence had lasted only a few days. "How did you guess it was I? I was expecting you." "Expecting me?" said I, so astonished that I could only repeat her words, wondering, and I was still on my knees. "Let us go to the bench," she went on. "Yes, I knew I was to see you again once more. For the last 3 days I have come here every evening and called you, as I did tonight. Why didn't you answer?" So you see that Elisa probably felt that her death was too near, and for the last 3 evenings she hoped to meet Jerome. Now there is no rationality behind this. Why should after 3 years Jerome suddenly be there? But she hoped against hope. "Let us go to the bench. If you had not come upon me by surprise, I should have gone away without seeing you," I said, steeling myself against the emotion which had at first overpowered me. I happened to be at Le Havre and merely meant to walk along the avenue and round the outside of the garden and to rest a few moments on this bench. If Jerome tries to make it appear that he did not want to renew this relationship, he just accidentally came by and he wanted to leave very quickly. "Look what I have brought here to read for the last 3 evenings," she interrupted, and held out to me a packet of letters. I recognized those I had written her from Italy. At that moment, I raised my eyes to look at her. So, she would read Jerome's letters. Before her death, she was constantly thinking about Jerome. And then he notices how Elisa had changed. She was extraordinarily changed. Her thinness, her paleness smote my heart horribly. Leaning heavily upon my arm, she clung to me as though she were frightened or cold. She was still in deep mourning, and no doubt the black lace which she had put round her head and which framed her face added to her paleness. She was mourning because of her father's death. She was smiling, but her failing limbs seemed hardly to bear her up. I was anxious to know whether she was alone at Fungusmar. No, Robert was living with her. Juliet, Edward and their children had been spending August with them. We had reached the bench. We sat down and the conversation for a few minutes longer dragged along in the usual commonplace inquiries. Now, Reed describes the setting sun. I suppose that it is symbolical of the imminent death of Elisa. The setting sun, which had been hidden for a few moments by a cloud, reappeared on the edge of the horizon almost opposite us, flooding the empty fields with a shimmering glory and heaping the narrow valley that opened at our feet with a sudden profusion of wealth. Then it disappeared. So this is how Elisa also appeared and would disappear. I felt that I was wrapped round and steeped in a kind of a golden ecstasy in which my resentment vanished and nothing survived in me but love. Elisa, who had been leaning, drooping against me, sat up. She took out of her bodice a tiny packet wrapped up in tissue paper, made as though she meant to give it to me. Stopped, seemed to hesitate, and as I looked at her in surprise, "Listen, Jerome," said she, "this is my amethyst cross that I have here. For the last 3 evenings I have brought it here because for a long time past I have been wanting to give it to you." "What am I to do with it?" I asked her, rather brusquely. "Keep it in memory of me for your daughter." "What daughter?" I cried, looking at Elisa without understanding her. So Elisa had thought that when Jerome would marry, then he would give her this amethyst cross. But since Jerome did not have any such plans right now, so he is very surprised. "Please listen to me quite calmly." "No, don't look at me so. Don't look at me. It is already difficult enough for me to speak to you. But I simply must say this. Listen, Jerome. One day you will marry. No, don't answer. Don't interrupt. I implore you. I only want you to remember that I loved you very much. And a long time ago, 3 years ago, I thought that daughter of yours might one day wear this little cross you liked in memory of me. Oh, without knowing whose it was. And perhaps too you might give her my name." So, Elisa kind of knew that she won't be there for very long. And she wanted to be remembered by Jerome and his family. And if Jerome gave his daughter her name, then she would be remembered through his daughter. "Elisa, whom should I marry? You know I can love no one but you." And suddenly clasping her wildly, almost brutally in my arms, I crushed my kisses on her lips. An instant I held her, unresisting. As she half lay back against me, I saw her look grow dim. Then her eyes closed, and in a voice so true and melodious that never to my mind will it be equal. "Have pity on us, my friend," she said. "Oh, don't spoil our love." So, obviously this was a great emotional moment, and we see that Elisa did not resist Jerome kissing her, but what she said calmly, she said that don't spoil our love. That indicates that to Elisa, Jerome's love for her, that was understood and realized without physical experience, without any physical consummation, and therefore it was not necessary. And she still believed that Jerome would walk on the path of virtue, and but the fact that she now speaks about Jerome getting married, so she has somehow come to an understanding that her desire of Jerome turning into Saint Jerome was unrealistic. However, to her it appears that the any kind of physical sexual experience was not necessary in order to realize the truth of their love. Therefore, she says that do not spoil our love, which means that she still believed that their love was very noble and of ethereal quality, and therefore, kissing or other sexual experiences, they were not strictly necessary. But she also does not resist him any longer. Therefore, we see this strange contradiction, that if she had come to accept that Jerome would marry somebody, that he would not be a saint, then her sacrifice, her not marrying him, her not allowing, sexual consummation of their love, that would appear to be futile, but it does not cloud her or the reader's imagination. It does not cloud the fact that to her the idea of loving Jerome, that was pure and noble, and she wanted it to remain like that. So that did not need any confirmation from physical consummation. Right. Do you have any comments to make on this? Therefore, we may say that perhaps Alyssa failed. Perhaps she did not or could not achieve what she wanted, because she wanted to achieve something very strange, and she wanted Jerome to be a saint. Now, she rejected the idea of physical consummation. She followed the older tradition of celibacy herself, and found that sexuality was a kind of contradiction or an obstacle towards love of God. All these ideas, or we may say religious ideology, these took her in a direction that led nowhere. And that is why she failed, or she appeared to realize that this path won't lead anywhere. But at the same time, we do not see in her any frustration or any sense of failure for that. She simply accepts that life must go on, even though she has destroyed herself for no reason. Jerome's life would go on. Then she says, as she tells Jerome to give the amethyst cross to his future daughter, why not give it her yourself? She tried to speak again. Her lips trembled like those of a sobbing child, but she did not cry. The extraordinary light that shone in her eyes flooded her face with an unearthly and angelic beauty. Alyssa, whom should I marry? You know I can love no one but you. And suddenly clasped, well, I already read that. Perhaps she said to don't be cowardly, or perhaps it was I who said it to myself. I cannot tell now. But suddenly flinging myself on my knees before her and folding my arms piously round her, If you loved me so, why have you always repulsed me? Think, I waited first for Juliet to be married. I understood you were waiting for her to be happy too. She is happy. You yourself have told me so. I thought for a long time that you didn't want to leave your father, but now we are both alone. That is, father was also an excuse. She could not leave her father, therefore she could not marry. But now father is not there. Oh, don't let us regret the past, she murmured. I have turned the page now. There is still time, Elisa. No, my friend, there is not time. There was no longer time from the moment when our love made us foresee for one another something better than love. So Elisa, it seems, is a victim to this religious belief that the love for God is much superior to any worldly love. Therefore, worldly love must come to be frustrated. And when she says that there is no longer time, or there was no longer time, the moment we could foresee that worldly love is inferior to love for God, and that from that moment our love was destined to be frustrated. Therefore, let us not regret it. And that is why we do not see any indication of frustration, of failure, or of sadness in that sense in Elisa. Okay, Elisa is sad, but she does not regret it because her ideology made her accept that her love for Jerome would never be materialized. Thanks to you, my friend, my dream climbed so high that any earthly satisfaction would have been a declension. I have often thought of what our life with each other would have been. As soon as it had been less than perfect, I could not have borne our love. So this very high estimation of love, any worldly consummation of this love by marriage, that would never have reached this level of expectation. And Elisa could not have accepted any fall from that height. It would appear to her as a declension, as a fall. That is why she does not regret it. Did you ever think what our life would be without each other? No, never. Now you see, for the last 3 years without you, I have been drifting miserably about. I am cold, said she, getting up and wrapping her shawl too closely round her for me to be able to take her arm again. You remember the scripture text which troubled us so and which we were afraid we didn't understand properly. These all received not the promise, God having provided some better thing for us. This better thing, the superior thing, the love for God and union with God, that remained a temptation or some kind of a unobtainable goal for these two lovers. Do you still believe those words? Indeed, I mused. We walked on for a few moments beside each other without saying anything more. She went on, can you imagine it, Jerome? Some better thing. So we see that Elisa is still a firm believer that there is a better world, there is heaven, there is a much more glorious union and consummation of love with God than this world. And suddenly the tears started from her eyes as she repeated once more, some better thing. We had again reached the small garden door through which she had come out a little before. Now this small garden door, in the novel, it takes up the contour of the imagined straight gate in heaven, the narrow gate through which one passes to heaven. Goodbye, said she. No, don't come any further. Goodbye, my beloved friend. now the better thing is going to begin. So this small gate through which only one person can pass, that is how Elisa imagined the straight gate to heaven. And Elisa says that you do not come, and now the better thing will begin, which means that she is expecting her death. As soon as the door was shut, as soon as I heard the bolt drawn behind her, I fell against the door, a prey to the extremest despair, and stayed for a long time weeping and sobbing in the night. Why? Because Jerome realized that this was the final goodbye. He realized that there was no likelihood of meeting Elisa again. And so if we look at this reification of the metaphor of the straight gate, which is reified through the garden door, small door in the garden, through which only one person passes. And as that door was shut, then the separation between the two lovers becomes permanent. We see here that this extreme sadness or despair that Jerome felt, which Elisa did not seem to feel. Why is there this difference? Because unlike Elisa, Jerome did not fully have faith in this opposition between worldly love and love of God. And that is why he felt despair that this love would never be materialized. Elisa, on the other hand, had full faith that love of God was superior, and therefore she did not have this regret or sense of despair, even though she was sad to be separated from Jerome.